The 1803 Louisiana Purchase had doubled the territory of the United States, extending it to the Rocky Mountains. To the southwest was Mexico, a large country which included Texas and what is now New Mexico, Utah, Nevada, Arizona, California, and part of Colorado. In 1836, with the help of the United States, Texas broke off from Mexico, and in 1845 James Polk brought it into the Union as a state. By 1845, things for the U.S. were going great. They had already settled its slave dispute by balancing its slave and non-slave states. They were the naval superpower and had a great economy. Americans were filled with nationalism, and with that came the desire to expand. James Polk had already set his sights in California and tried to buy it, but when Mexico said no, he began thinking of other ways to acquire it. On June 30 of 1945, orders came from Washington City directing General Taylor, one of the main characters of the chapter, to move without any delay to some point near the coast of Sabine or elsewhere. Sean argues that the only purpose of this order was to provoke Mexicans. Polk needed a reason to start a war. General Taylor and his troops arrived on March 28, 1846, to their desired destination, and in the spring of that same year the incident that Polk was waiting for took place. It came in April, when Colonel Cross disappeared and was found 11 days later with his skull smashed by a heavy blow. It was assumed he had been killed by Mexican guerrillas crossing the river. The day after he was buried, April 25, a patrol of Taylor's soldiers was surrounded and attacked by Mexicans. The Mexicans had fired the first shot, but Sean argues that they had done what the American government wanted them to do. The U.S. had set a trap, and the Mexicans had stepped on it. On May 9, Polk was suggesting to his cabinet a declaration of war, based on certain money claims against Mexico. He exaggerated and emphasized Mexico's doing, and excused the U.S. by saying that each act was a necessary measure of defense. He also said the later famous quote, "American blood on American soil," which, as Sean points out, was inaccurate since they weren't on official American soil. Abraham Lincoln was firmly against the war. His Polk resolutions became famous since he challenged Polk to specify the exact spot where American blood was shed. As the war went on, opposition grew. The American Peace Society printed a newspaper, the Advocate of Peace, which published poems, speeches, petitions, sermons against the war, and eyewitnesses' accounts of the degradation of army life and the horrors of the battle. Sean specifically criticizes two-volume work by Justin Smith, The War of Mexico, since he argues that Smith's evidence is not from the people but from the newspapers claiming to be the voice of the people. Were the newspapers reporting a feeling in the public or creating a feeling in the public? However, the newspapers weren't enough to keep the people excited, and by late 1846 recruitments were falling off. This caused physical requirements to lower, and when this didn't work, they began promising them 100 acres of public land. But eventually, the reality of the battle came upon the glory and the promises. General Kearny moved easily into New Mexico, and Santa Fe was taken without battle. However, not all of them were. Mexicans in Tao and Los Angeles rebelled against American rule. Both rebellions were easily crushed by the soldiers. Soldiers became more unruly in Mexican territory. Mexican villages were destroyed. They would steal all they could find, and cases of rape began multiplying. A group of men from a Kentucky regiment even broke into one Mexican dwelling, threw out the husband, and raped his wife. Eventually, Mexico surrendered, and the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed in 1884. The Texas boundary was set at the Rio Grande. New Mexico and California were ceded, and the U.S. paid Mexico $15 million, which led the weak intelligencer to conclude that we take nothing by conquest, thank God. So how is it different from regular history? In regular history, they don't mention how the accident of April 1846 was provoked, or the uncertainty of the quote, American blood on American soil, since it wasn't sure if it was actually American soil. And they don't mention either how bad the soldiers treated the Mexican people, or even about the volunteer fraud. Thanks for watching. Bye.